It is just such a pleasure to be able to speak with all of you. I'm humbled and honored to be in the presence of such wonderful women, women of faith who support GSEP, support our students, and most importantly, support each other as we work through this crisis and as we as women are caregivers in so many different ways. To each other, to our communities, to our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, and to our friends. So this is really, a time for us to have fellowship, to be together, and to learn how to manage this crisis is on behalf of our children who are so important. On the screen, you're going to see a poll. What's your opinion of K-12 remote learning? And, as you can respond, it's interesting to see, different folks' opinions about it. And we all have such differential experiences, whether it be as an observer of, children of our friends or our family members, or whether it be as a parent ourselves navigating this interesting environment we find ourselves in. So we'll kind of keep our eye on the results of that poll as you all respond. So far, it looks like only a few people are loving it, and that's to be expected. So I want to share a little bit about myself and my positionality and why I think I was called upon to do this presentation. So my name is Jennifer, as you know, and as you see on your screen. It is my honor to serve as an assistant professor here in the education division at GSEP. I am a scholar practitioner, big titles, but I think what they mean at their heart is that I take the theory and the research that we as an academy dive into and create, but really my focus is on translating that into practice. So my registers will switch from academic to more casual and a practitioner lens, because ultimately in times of crisis, that's really what we need. We need to be able to sit in the middle of theory and practice and reflect on what's working and what's not working, so that both ends, both the academic side and the research side and the practitioner lens, are equally respected and mutually informing each other. Another one of my lenses is that I'm a mom. So I have two wonderful daughters who are the saving grace of this situation and have displayed more resilience than I or my husband have been able to. So I have a kindergartner and a fourth grader. So I am not only trying to inform practice in learning and K-12 online learning, but also am the receiver and the implementer and sometimes the sufferer of this difficult transition. So I kind of have all of these lenses, and the very last lens I will share is that my husband is a K-12 teacher. And so he is trying to transition online and meet the needs of his students. So I am fully immersed in this world in many different ways. And so I hope that unique perspective will help bring insight into our discussion today. As we close out our poll here, it looks like only two of you are loving online learning. And some of you see that it has potential, and about a third of us are saying, get this over with. We need to go back to our face-to-face classes. So I think that that's probably reflective of the general feel as well. So we're all trying to make the best of this situation with our most important constituents, our children. So I'm going to hop right in and just kind of say what I hope that we have at the end of this session is that we've taken a look at the state of K-12 education and remote learning in the U.S., and that we discuss some of the affordances as well as the challenges of online learning for our students and for ourselves as caregivers. I'd like to also provide some kind of best practices and tips, tools of the trade to help create an effective online learning environment for our students. And then finally, and this is where it's closest to my heart in the realm of social justice, is that when we're looking at remote learning, the ways in which this situation has perpetuated inequities and further pushed some of our students and our families to the margins. So how are we going to commit ourselves to not only servicing our own children, but uplifting and supporting those who have limited access and resources and we're already on the margins. And then finally, we'll close out with how are we going to prepare for the new school year and the new reality for kids. Right now, we're so focused on how we're being impacted at the moment that we need to create a runway for our children to transition to what likely will be their schooling experiences in the fall. So those are kind of our outcomes for today, and I hope through this journey together we'll be able to reach those. I'm going to share a little bit, as I briefly did, about my family for context. I'm sure many of you had first day of school pictures like this. You saw, your friends' children, your own children or grandchildren. So this was our exciting first day, kindergarten for my littlest daughter, Belen, and fourth grade for my oldest daughter. We were eager and ready to go. My children attended dual language school, so all of their school day is in Spanish. And it was just so exciting, especially for my kindergartner. And we had high hopes for the school year, which I do still think we will reach. This is our after. So this is now us in the midst of chaos at our school. My husband has his 3 screens trying to reach all of his students. He's producing videos and websites, as well as supporting his colleagues at school with their technological needs as it relates to online learning. And then you see my 2 little ones at their screens, which is something we never allowed them to do previously, yet the situation necessitates that's the way their schooling is occurring at the moment. I think of particular note is you see my little kindergartner with her stuffed animals there as she's, one finger typing at the computer. And to me, that really captures the moment. She's still a child. She's still a little girl who needs connections, who needs comfort as she looks at a screen and hopes to continue to advance her learning and find, those relationships that she so desperately needs. So this is kind of our before and our after, our beginning of the school year and now, which I'm sure many of you can relate to, that disruption and the drastic change. So we'll take a moment right now in fellowship to kind of discuss what remote learning has looked like for your family and your friends. So you can share some of your stories, your anecdotes, your observations, what you've heard, from your circles and from your experiences, and any questions that you might have. Vanessa is graciously going to send us into breakout rooms right now, and we'll spend a few minutes just kind of reflecting on our current state and our current experiences. We'll see you in a moment. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we have everyone back from our breakout rooms. Thank you, Vanessa, for facilitating that. And all right, so these were just kind of some of the slides, just so we can get a real context into how significant this is. And I think so often we look locally, as we should be, but this is really, a national and a global crisis in learning for our students. So it's 55.1 million students currently in the United States that are out of school. So let's take a look at some of the, in technology terms, we use the word affordances, right? Some of the benefits that remote learning can provide to our K-12 students, as well as examine some of the real challenges. So in terms of affordances, this is looking at online learning based on the research. and the potential of remote learning to really benefit our K-12 students. So in terms of creativity, if online learning is done well, there are so many possibilities for students to explore themselves, to really think from an individual lens, to take off some of the parameters, the restrictions that a brick and mortar classroom can sometimes impose due to limited resources, time constraints, and the like. So when online learning is really at its height, we can bring out such deep creativity in our students. And of course, we have so many resources that are available online. This differs by grade level, by access, but there are unlimited resources really that we can pull from if we are curating meaningful opportunities and lists of resources for students. One of the things I'm most excited about as a K-12 practitioner is the ability to publish student work. And this is for all grade levels, including our preschoolers. When we enter the online space, there's so many opportunities to celebrate and publish work. So instead of students just writing an essay to turn into the teacher, or doing a dot to dot, or coloring something, and having the end be a submission to their instructor, now there's so many ways that we can publish good work and really celebrate it. It can be put on the classroom website. Students can create and publish, their podcasts or their stories that they're writing for the public good, and that audience can share in their appreciation. So I think transitioning to the online space is really forcing teachers to think about how do we really honor student work in new and unique ways, and how do we create audiences for students that didn't exist before when we were limited to the K-12 classroom. There's also unique opportunities for community building. And we know that this is the real challenge. We heard in our breakout rooms some of the families talking about, especially the younger students, really going to school for social reasons and needing that social emotional development. But there are opportunities to build community and create deep connections beyond the classroom. And so what we find a lot of K-12 schools are doing are creating partnerships with other schools, other classrooms outside of their region, and even international partnerships, so that students are getting that cross-cultural community and that intercultural sort of relationship building. So when we use the technology well, it actually can expand our communities and create stronger partnerships and stronger relationships, many of which we never conceived of to exist before, but are developing out of necessity and our need to actually bring our communities closer together. Of course, online learning is a way of tapping into students' different learning styles, their different modalities. And so we can bring in different ways of reaching our students, as well as creating content that students, that is going to be interesting and engaging for students in different ways. Less teacher directed, harnessing the different modalities of student learning to create a rich learning environment. A big move over the past 2 decades has been towards personalized learning. I actually taught at a school that specialized in personalized mastery learning. So when we use online learning, we can really differentiate for individual students, and each student can kind of take their own learning path. The challenge, of course, is that teachers need specialized training in this. But online learning provides an opportunity for that differentiation, where students can kind of dictate and follow their own learning journey if the parameters are set up right for the teacher and the family to be the facilitator of that journey. And so students can develop that self-regulation and pursue their own curiosity and interest in a meaningful way when they're not bound by traditional classroom constraints. The other affordance of online learning is that it can lend itself to project-based learning. I often look at project-based learning as a form of social justice, wherein students can observe the problems that they are witnessing in their communities, challenges, and for preschoolers, it can be something that they observe in terms of recycling or in terms of kindness. And then, of course, as we move up through the age levels, our middle schoolers and our high schoolers can see, different forms of injustice or different challenges that our community members are facing. And through the online platform, our students can go about researching solutions to those problems and really engaging in projects that are meaningful and relevant and have real-world applications. And so, project-based learning, or PBL, is really an example of how we can combine a pedagogy with an online platform to create meaningful, higher-level projects for students. Of course, we have our challenges as represented by our delta sign here. And I'm going to go into more about the equity issues with online learning, but access continues to be a challenge for our students, and equitable access, I should say. So while many families are able to provide a space for their students to work in the online environment, they have the technology resources, Wi-Fi access, as well as deep technological knowledge beyond just understanding how to navigate a cell phone or an iPad. There's other families and students who are really struggling with this. So access and reliable access is a huge hurdle and challenge, particularly for underserved communities, rural communities, and those student populations, our community members who have been marginalized. Distance, in terms of social distance, is also a challenge. So while online learning can be super engaging, what we have found is that many of our teachers, and this is by no means a condemnation of our teachers, I live with one and they are working their hardest and doing the very best they can. But it is difficult to create a warm online learning environment. Historically, online learning really traces its roots back to correspondence education, where there'd be an advertisement in a magazine, in the 1940s, 1950s, for some sort of educational resource, and you'd mail in your check or your order and fill out the form, and then you'd get these resources mailed to you. And online learning has evolved very much since then. But what we see is that in times of crisis, and particularly in low-resourced areas where teachers themselves and school districts lack support, we often see us going back to more of that distance, that transactional type of remote learning. So that is a challenge. How do we limit that, warm up the environment, as well as make it an interactional as opposed to a transactional type of learning experience? We also see that there's unfortunately increased repetition, and that has to do with a lack of training and many of our students not having the family type of engagement and support that they need in the academic sense. All our children are loved by their families, and I always take an asset-based approach to our students, our communities, and our families. But there is a difference in being able to provide academic support and in the ways in which families from middle and upper income have participated and been successful in schooling experiences, who then can replicate that in their own home, versus those who haven't had that same type of experience and can't replicate those middle and upper class traditional academic and scholarly behaviors and environments that one has experienced. And new learning is a challenge. And what most school leaders and researchers have suggested in this time of crisis is that teachers actually don't try to teach new things, but really focus on what has been taught, practicing those skills and applying those skills. And so where we may be able to continue the learning, the challenge is how do we actually teach new concepts in an equitable way? You know, it's one thing to practice addition and to have introduce new activities with addition. It's another thing to move on to multiplication and teach an entirely new concept. So new learning in the K-12 space is a real challenge, especially moving forward. And then, of course, we have one of the struggles is appropriateness and making sure that learning is developmentally appropriate. My kindergartner needs to run around and play, not sit at the computer. That is not a developmentally appropriate use of technology. And her teachers have been doing a fabulous job of creating different learning experiences and really limiting the amount of screen time. But developmental appropriateness is something that we all kind of need to have our eye on. Policies and permissions continue to be a struggle as things are, you know, we have so many restrictions, particularly in the public school and the K-12 environment. And so policies are continually being developed. And in this case, I'm really thinking of privacy as a concern that has never been quite so tenuous right now. So, you know, we want to have these live sessions with students. We want to do Zoom. We want to do Google Meet. But what happens in the background? And who, you know, whose privacy is being respected or disrespected? And what is the role of teachers in terms of what they see happening in the background? Do they need to report what they see? Are we invading, you know, students' home spaces? Are we seeing things that can't be unseen? And so policies are really limiting, particularly in the public school space, what type of live experiences students are able to have. We see more freedom in the private school space, where families are really opting into those live experiences, Google Meets, you know, or Zoom. But in the private school space, in the public school space, there's a lot of legal restrictions that are that have to be considered. And then we have permissions is another challenge. You know, school districts have to limit what students can see and the resources teachers can use. And so those actual permissions are freeing in the sense that they give families a sense of confidence that their students won't be perusing everything on their Chromebooks or their iPads, but they are very challenging for teachers. So if a teacher wants to, for example, post a YouTube video of the ABCs, oftentimes school districts have tight restrictions, and they have to actually get specific individual permissions for each item a teacher wants to use. And finally, of course, a major challenge is the confusion of roles and responsibilities, as we kind of touched on in one of our breakout rooms. Everybody's roles are confused right now. Our responsibilities are confused. And that creates stress, not only for ourselves and for teachers, but really for our kids. You know, there's times when I see my own daughters kind of looking at me and deciding, you know, which approach they should take. Is she in mommy mode? Is she in work mode? Is she in teacher mode? You know, is she helping me with my schoolwork right now? Or is she with her headphones on a meeting? And that, I know, is very stressful for my daughters, as it is for a lot of our children that are out there who are not only navigating their own transitions, but also trying really hard to be mindful of the transitions of their caregivers and their family members. So that confusion of roles and responsibilities is something not to really underestimate as a cause of stress for our children. So overall, I wanted to touch upon some of the impacts of this situation on our lives and on the schooling of our children. So like I mentioned, routines have been disrupted and relationships have been disrupted. And, we often think about our younger learners as really needing that social environment, but our middle and our high school students need it as well. And although they might not say it, right, or they might not show it, it is coming up time and time again with colleagues. One of my colleagues recently went out on a mission. His job was to put graduation signs in front of all the seniors' houses. And, so he would knock on the door with his mask, and, a scared 18-year-old grown-up senior would come to the door. And he kept saying time and time again, whether he knew the student closely or not, that their eyes would just light up just to see a familiar face. And he shared an anecdote of one of the students he was particularly close with, a giant 18-year-old, young man looked at him and said, "I miss you," in a way that he probably, would never had said had they still been, at school. And Dr. Cook said back, "I miss you too." And the 18-year-old said back to him, "No, I really miss you." That's a lot for an 18-year-old young man to say. And so, we often think of ourselves as having very strong relationships with our nieces and our nephews and our friends' children and our grandchildren. But the relationship between student and teacher is something quite special. And even if it is tenuous, it is something regular that our students look forward to each and every day. And so we want to honor those relationships and talk about them. As I mentioned, milestones, these traditional childhood and schooling milestones have been disrupted. We're not having our culminations, our transitions from 5th grade, our kindergarten graduations. Think about how many of the younger children have watched their older siblings get to participate in all of these milestones, these trips and field trips that their older siblings got to take, graduations, proms. My daughter, my kindergartner, had a breakdown last week because she said all the kids at the school got to go on to the farm field trip in kindergarten. That's like their big class thing, is everybody goes to the farm in kindergarten. And she was melting down and crying, saying, "But I didn't get to go to the farm." And by no means was it, this sort of self-absorbed type of pity. It was really like she didn't get to share in a community experience that has been this big tradition. And so she, and that's going to be true for many of our students. There's going to be this year-long or longer gap of experiences that we talk about in our common vernacular. How was prom? Oh, how was the farm? Or did you go on the 5th grade trip? Those are going to be experiences that are missing for our students. Language, recent research has really change in language use among children during the crisis. And so while our children are at home, they're using informal language, they're using emojis and filters and really chatting away with those who are closest to them in their homes. There's a lack of formal language development. And that really becomes a responsibility that we have, is how can we create at home spaces or the necessity to use formal language, which transitions to long-term academic success. So how do we have them engage in formal writing, engage in formal conversations? And I have a few tips that I'll get to at the end about that. Academic growth continues to be a concern, and we know that there will be a narrowing, is the term that we use in the research field, a narrowing of curriculum. So what often happens in times of crisis is that we focus in on kind of the reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so we see an emphasis on English language arts and math. and a de-emphasis on all of our other critically important subjects, whether they be the elective subjects, the arts, or science and social studies and physical education and health. And so when we have that reduction of curriculum, we get very much a narrow focus on what's tested. And so that's going to be a challenge. And of course, we know assessments, SATs, standardized assessments, grading policies are all going to be disrupted. I also want to emphasize, as we're putting pressure on our kids to continue on in their learning, there are some real things that happen when there's trauma and stress in the environment, and they have effects, especially on executive functioning in children when they're in stressful situations. Their focus, their memory, and their overall performance and cognition are impacted and reduced in these types of situations. So we want to consider that as students are working through their online learning, that really there are impacts on their cognitive abilities in these stressful situations. And lastly, as we're looking at career and college readiness, there are significant impacts on students as they matriculate and through our K-12 school system. So we're looking at, our kids not receiving the same college guidance that they would normally receive, the same help filling out their forms, their FAFSAs. And this, of course, is going to disproportionately impact students who don't have that social capital, who don't have the network and the connections that their middle and upper class counterparts do. Students oftentimes get prepared for vocational education, have career pathways that are created for them in their K-12 schooling experiences. And those situations and that support is no longer there in a personalized and meaningful way. So those are some of the major challenges. I'm going to take a moment here to look at the impact of transitioning to remote learning as it relates to our most vulnerable communities. I hate the term at risk because really these are our children. These are our community members, and they are at promise. So I look at it as taking ownership of what are our individual roles and responsibilities to make sure that they reach their promise, and what promises do we make to all of our community members, regardless of where they live or their various social locations. So as we know, our public schools and our policies lead to inequitable schooling experiences. So I'm going to talk about a couple different ways in which inequity has been perpetuated even further in this transition to remote learning. So briefly, we talked about issues of equity and access. We had school districts like where my own children go, where the majority of the students are low income, scrambling to make sure that the students had devices, making sure that Chromebooks were distributed, Wi-Fi, hotspots were distributed. So there continues to be a lack of access and equity when it comes to remote learning. And a lot of times there's this sort of surface level perception. Well, I see kids on the phone all the time. Using technology in that way is not an academic or scholarly use of technology. So whether or not a parent or a child has a phone does not mean that they necessarily have the access to school type technology. And so that is a constant struggle. And I look at my own home. My husband teaches at a school that has a high number of students who are homeless or who live in group homes. And those students are especially vulnerable right now. My husband had to scramble on the last day before they shut down his middle school to make massive amounts of photocopies and packets and gather resources and crayons and colored pencils all of these different types of materials, and then had to schedule appointments with their caseworkers and their social workers to hand deliver these materials to the students. And so we see that you know, our most vulnerable, our most at promise students are really you know, suffering the most in this situation, and often needing those connections with meaningful adults in their lives the most. So that's a real challenge. Support and infrastructure is another limiting factor. Our teachers need support. I'm a huge advocate of teachers. They need training. They need constant support in order to be able to transition in a meaningful way to online learning. They need resources. They need licenses to different platforms. And they need instructional designers to go in and help them build these sites, to help them access different resources and use them in a developmentally appropriate way with their students. And that infrastructure is again unequal. So we see in more resourced districts that our teachers are fully supported. They're supported by families in a financial way, which has a huge impact on the quality of instruction that's available. And our you know, less well-resourced school districts are really struggling. And the question is, how are they going to afford this moving forward? Is there going to be specially allocated funds for low resource districts to maintain all of these devices that they've given out, to hire new people to work on these devices, and to train teachers and to train family members, not only in English, but to train family members in multiple languages, how to facilitate their students' online learning. Learners with exceptionalities are students who have disabilities, who have special needs, are really struggling during these situations. So they, unfortunately, while technology can be differentiated and really lead to personalized learning from a computer, you know, or computer in a computer-mediated way, is not servicing all of our students. And many of our students with IEPs or who have disabilities or exceptionalities receive their services from the school site, all of their therapeutic services, their specialized services and support. And in the home environment, they're not being reached right now to the degree that we have promised them. And so that's a real point of sadness in that our students with exceptionalities who really need that high level of service and continuity of service are not being served well at the moment. Another vulnerable population are our emergent bilinguals. You'll traditionally hear the term English language learners or English learners. I think that's a deficit term. So I use the term emergent bilinguals because they're the ones who are going to be multilingual, who have ample language resources. But they're not having the opportunity to both develop their home languages as well as develop cognitive academic language in English. And so that's going to be a real struggle. That's going to set back their English language development, which has implications not only on their current schooling, but their future schooling opportunities. So our emergent bilinguals have to, in order to reclassify as English proficient and take in their future credit-bearing English classes in high school, which will qualify them for college, they have to pass an exam that's called the LPAC. And they have to have a sufficient proficiency in the English language in order to pass that exam. And every year they don't pass it, the standards and criteria get higher. But then they're not receiving the instruction in English that they need. And so what I predict that we will see is a lot more long-term English learners who are sort of trapped in this in this void without the ability or the opportunity to pass the LPAC by no fault of their own or any fault of their families, for sure. So our emergent bilinguals, especially in a state like California and in Southern California, are a population we really need to focus on moving forward. And finally, in terms of inequity, our schools have become these wonderful places that provide not only academic enrichment, but community services. You know, food insecurity, for example, is a huge challenge in Southern California as well as nationally. LA Unified School District itself has been serving approximately 600,000 meals a day to students and their families. In our own district, we are serving thousands of meals a day, a week to vulnerable families. So, you know, we often think of schooling maybe in terms of our own lens and academic enrichment and teachers, but in you know, underserved communities, our At Promise students look to schools to fill in a lot of the voids in social services and in resources. Health education will also be impacted, and our screenings, our vision and dental screenings that students receive at school. You know, I think to myself, when I was in middle school, because of the scoliosis screening I had, I was able to get treatment. So it's these initial screenings that happen in schools in both, you know, underserved school districts as well as wealthier school districts that are going to be missed this school year and at the beginning of next school year when we're in unique, different environments. I also think about the health education component, you know, where students are learning about reproductive health, being informed about their own physical development, and how critical for many students that information is in learning about their bodies and their development. And you know, there's going to be a gap this year for those particular students. Counseling supports, community and career readiness that our schools provide, as well as parent resources and parent education. And those things really help to transfer social capital by making those networking, translation services available. And so, you know, our families and our parents really look to schools to help them navigate different bureaucratic structures to learn how to help their students. And those parent education and resources are transitioning online, but may not necessarily be accessible, particularly if a family's home language isn't English. So what can we do given these crazy circumstances, as well as the larger context of a perpetuation of inequity? There is light. There are things that we can do. We do have agency, especially in our own homes with our own children and those family members and friends that we love. So I'll take a moment to say, and take a breath here, that it's so important to focus on our children's social and emotional well-being. And there's many ways that we can do that. In our own home, we've been playing with dolls a lot more than we used to. And what we're seeing is that our children are talking in the voice of their dolls about their own insecurities and their own challenges, the things that they wish. They're enacting schooling experiences with their dolls that used to be daily, but now they're really memories, but they're bringing those experiences to life. And so you see in this picture, my husband playing with my daughter here and allowing her to give voice to some of those emotions, to relive those cherished experiences with them. So it's taking time to be a playmate as opposed to a parent or a teacher that can allow students to work through some of the emotions and the insecurities that they're experiencing. A few other tips in the area of fostering social emotional well-being are making sure that we are using affirmations and compliments as willingly as we can and as frequently as we can. And of course, we want our praise to be behavior specific. So not just great job, but, I really appreciate, that you helped your sister do this. So I really appreciate the way in which you focused during your online learning. So being, doling out those behavior specific affirmations and praises. Also taking family breaks, engaging in mindfulness and yoga. And this doesn't have to be so serious. One of my favorite things to do, particularly with little kids, is to do alphabet yoga. And so you are doing yoga poses, but spelling out the letters of the alphabet. So you're bringing in that academic enrichment with mindfulness practice that will last students, not only through this time, but throughout their lives. And so you can say, let's do math yoga. Can we make a 2 with our bodies? Now, what if we added 2 more? What if you make a body with your 2 and your sister makes a body with her 2? How many is that all together? So it's combining kind of, the social emotional practices with academic experiences. And another way to look at bringing mindfulness in is really to transition to how can we make connections between these experiences and strengthening our faith life. So one of the things we've done in our own home and that I've heard many others do is praying at different times in our daily lives than we normally would. So before my children sign on for their sessions with their classmates and with their teachers, we say, let's take a moment to pray for everyone. Whereas normally in our daily lives, we wouldn't do that, right? Our kids, we drop them off at school and they're going through their day. So we find that there's new moments where we can bring our faith life and our faith journey into this crisis as a way to consider others' perspectives, and to really bring God's grace into the moment. And so we've started inserting these sort of prayer moments into different parts of our day where they didn't exist before. And that's been really uplifting and really unifying for my family to strengthen our faith journey together and to see how it needs to be a part of different moments of our lives and moments that we in the past have been too rushed to allow God's grace in. And then there are just a couple other tips I have about journaling. You've heard a lot of people say to journal, to have kids journal. One of the wonderful things I saw a school doing was having their students create a COVID-19 or coronavirus time capsule, and to pull and talk about the different experiences they're having, take pictures of different parts of their daily life, where they are and who they are in this moment, which is significant in their development. It's going to be significant historically. So to prepare that kind of time capsule so that when they're ready later on in their journey and in their development, they can look back at this time and really reflect on it with some concrete examples of their life today. And finally, I would really recommend for families and support members, caregivers, aunts and uncles, grandparents, to help students with finality close out the school year. It's different, right? We're not having graduations. We don't have end of the year parties, but our students really need us at all ages. They really need the adults in their lives to put an end to this school year and to bookmark it somehow. So whether that's, going around the house and taking pictures of their different work, reflecting on some of the highlights of their school year, and then saying, this school year is over. We need those markers, and our students need those markers so they can say, this is it. This was what it was. It will continue to be a point of reflection. Now we're moving into summer and new experiences and a different school year, a different type of school year moving forward. Parents and families can also focus on experiential activities as opposed to new learning. So bringing in a project-based learning approach but making what you're trying to do in your families really relevant to daily experiences. So I'm thinking of our older kids. Oh my gosh, our food budget has really changed. Our meal planning has really changed. And so asking them, can you be part of the solution to this challenge that we're having in our lives? Can you look at my grocery receipts? I need help. And so look really for families to position themselves as needing help, as opposed to saying, I need you to sit down and do this math worksheet. But like, I am struggling during this time. Could you help me solve this problem? You know, and that really helps the children to feel agency in this situation. Like they can still be part of the solution and have a voice in a situation where it's really out of their control and out of their hands. And so the picture that you see here is my children really love basketball. And instead of doing another math worksheet, my husband sent them outside and they had to measure all of the basketball key, and then they worked together to spray paint it. And so that's what you see. They have the measuring tape out there. That's the best math lesson any of us could give them, and the best collaboration experience, more than anything they could do online or in a workbook. So really focus on those types of experiential activities, you know, pick up the worm and be just the friend and look at that worm and measure that worm and talk about that worm in ways that maybe we wouldn't have done in the past. Let's see. One of the things that I mentioned as a challenge is the lack of formal language that children are using, which is a key to future academic success. And so I recommend really implementing activities and engaging in activities with a purpose. So not just texting a friend, or not just getting on a Zoom call or FaceTiming with grandma or grandpa, but making those activities that can lend themselves to the use of formal language. So in this case, my daughter and her friend are writing letters to each other, but so it doesn't seem like homework, we actually purchased online really cheap those secret pens. And so you know, her friend and Belen can't see what the adults can't see what they're writing to each other. They have to use the secret pen that's glowing. And so we created this kindergarten age appropriate writing activity and environment that builds community and connection, but is cool. And so they use the secret pen to read each other's writing. And that's just a way of kind of making an academic exercise appropriate for students and relevant for this age level. And they were super cheap online, and it creates this kind of special relationship and writing experience. So using real mail has been a benefit for students if you can get them to write letters to each other. Another cool thing is right now what's happening is different generations and different family members are connecting with each other a lot more via FaceTime or Google Meet or Zoom. And so a way that we can turn those into more formal experiences is by giving each other tasks. So one of the things that I'm thinking about when my children are FaceTiming their grandparents is to do this activity we've called Who's Cool. And so my parents and my husband's parents are coming up with people or activities that were cool during their childhood and sharing those with my children, almost like a history lesson or a sharing of experiences. And then my children are telling my parents, who are acting really dumb, what's cool right now. And so they're doing research on what's cool and why it's cool, and then presenting it in a way that's very formal to my parents. It's almost like they're doing these argumentative or persuasive presentations, so that those engagements are less informal and in some ways become more academic, because then my parents are giving these history lessons. Well, back in the day, What was really cool was these old school phones, and they're talking about how communication used to be. And then my children are asking questions just like they would in a traditional classroom. But the relationship between the family members is strengthening. They're getting this historical lesson. Both parties are feeling like they're teaching each other something because they really are, and they're asking each other questions. And so that's a way that we can transition these informal conversations that we're so dependent on into being kind of teaching moments and encouraging the use of academic language while strengthening our bonds with each other. So we call it what was cool or who's cool. And so we can think about, bringing those types of activities into our casual and informal communication spaces. Finally, we're getting to the end. See, these Zoom calls are tough when you have to sit there and listen. So what's next? How do we move forward? Well, it's important for us to prepare students for the new school year. School next year, our predictions are school is going to look very, very different. And so I encourage families as they're navigating, the now and the challenges of now, to start incorporating future-oriented conversations. What is school gonna look like next year? It might be a little bit different. And to, share with your students the ways in which it might be different. Our morning routine, we used to just get up and get breakfast and brush our teeth, but now before we leave, we're gonna have to put on our masks. And those conversations are really important because you want to start building the routine now so that when they start a new school year, they won't just they'll have the natural anxiety of a new school year, but some of these routines and rituals that are going to be part of our daily lives will be like nothing to them because we've already practiced that. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you get your backpack ready, put your lunch in there, get by the door. And where's your mask hanging? You're going to keep your mask hanging on the doorknob. So let's practice that and putting it on. So building in those routines and rituals now and early is going to help ease the transition for our students. Practicing different types of greetings is going to be huge because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable, and we want to be comfortable. So what are some types of greetings that we might have to use now in this type of environment? Are we doing elbow bump? Are we doing air high five? So preparing them ahead of time for different types of intimacy and different types of relationship building. Another change is going to be how they eat food at school. So what is that going to look like? My fourth grader absolutely loves lunchtime. She gets to sit with any friends outside of her classes, and they open their lunch or they go buy their lunch. At my daughter's school, everybody has access to free and reduced lunch school-wide. So, they have all these practices and rituals that they're used to that are now going to be different. So we want that experience of something they cherish to not be so, to not be a surprise to them. And these things that we take for granted. Another thing to consider is practicing end of the day routines. So when your students come home from school, have a plan as to are we leaving shoes outside of the house? Are we taking off face masks and putting them in the washing machine? What are those end of day routines that are going to be a little bit more complicated now? Are we wearing jackets multiple times? Is there a place we put our jackets, so they don't end up on our beds? We really, as an educator, I encourage families to think more deeply about routines because it's not just the bedtime routine anymore. It's going to be other protocols that we need our children to engage with and practice in and agree to. And finally, I would say for all of us this is really an exercise in dealing with ambiguity. That's the best gift we can, or the best muscle for all of us to flex, and to teach our children at all ages to flex. In the academic world and scholarly behaviors, we talk about the ability to function in ambiguity as being one of the highest levels of thinking, to know that there's no concrete next step, or there isn't a plan I can follow, or I can't tell you what tomorrow's going to look like. And so how do we as a family, as adults, as children, prepare to deal with ambiguous circumstances? And in many ways, that's the best gift we can give our children, because life is ambiguous. And it's also an opportunity to bring back our faith, because if we can deal with ambiguity, we can give grace and receive grace, which is what all of us are going to need, now and moving forward. We want our children to show grace to their teachers who are teaching in these weird circumstances, and it's going to be more challenging in the fall, to give grace to their family members, to give grace to the children who are struggling, and to give grace to themselves. And so when we talk about dealing with ambiguity, it's a path to me, a path to accept grace and to give grace. And that really is the biggest lesson for all of us collectively. And with that, I am done until I get to hear your wonderful questions and feedback. So I know Vanessa is going to open it up to questions. Thank you so much for sitting through this presentation. I hope that there's some nugget that you've received and that you can pass along and share with others.
Thank you, Dr. Miyake-Trapp. I know in the chat bar and on text, I'm receiving a lot of praise for you and how much that you have blessed us and how much we needed to hear, not only the big picture, but drilling down and giving us some concrete tools that we can use and examples of how we can all move forward individually and collectively as parents and members in our home. Rosalind had asked, do you have any recommendations for communicating with teachers and/or principals about needed improvements in supportive ways? Like, how can we understand the system restrictions, but to also kind of be an advocate and be a voice in there instead of standing by when we see a need?
It's tough because I'm so, I wear all these different hats. I have such a unique position. So, I've been a teacher myself, and the parents that just nag, and complain. At the same time, like, I need my own kids' teachers to be on their game. So it's such a fine line to walk when you want to advocate and, support and offer suggestions, while also being sensitive to the constraints and the challenges that our administrators and our teachers are facing. So I really recommend, and this is always, not just in this situation, but when you approach any school official, is to ask for information first, to position yourself as a learner and not as a knower, because there are so many laws and restrictions and confidentiality things and politics, like Marie mentioned, that go into play, that come when we walk to a teacher or administrator as a knower. We don't, we already are entering a situation where there's an information gap. So we're not going to be helpful to each other. So if you just say, how do you think, if you're going to email a principal, ask them, or call a principal, say, how do you think online learning is going? Ask the questions. What are some of the amazing things that your teachers are doing? What are some challenges? And then you'll hear maybe, oh my gosh, we have so many students with broken Chromebook screens and we don't have the funds to pay for it. There's your entry point, right? That's how you can give. That's how you can help. And then you can say, oh, I noticed my student is, my own child is really enjoying this that the teacher is doing. And you can kind of give hints that way, right? Oh, I love how, my student teacher is posting lessons every day. How can I help? Like, how can we encourage our faculty to do that? Or what resources do our teachers need? So really kind of positioning yourself as a learner of the system, and then offering resources and asking what resources they need, as opposed to making direct suggestions. Because our teachers know, they're struggling, our administrators know, and they can't even get onto campus. So, just always, I'm a learner, I want to learn, and I want to support.
Great. Thank you for that good word. Do you have any other recommendations for online tools or supplements that parents can use, like a Khan Academy, to assist where there might be gaps?
Yeah. So in terms, I believe, or I shouldn't say I believe, the research shows that we have a significant summer learning loss. And this is going to be perpetuated even further. Many of you are familiar with, or your children or your family members are familiar with, the program that's used across the country with millions of students called iReady. And iReady is an online curriculum that many students use, especially in remote or large school districts. And what they have shown is that 93% of children from higher income brackets immediately started logging in again to their iReady online accounts, but only half of students from their lowest income brackets were logging in. So when we think of learning loss, not only in the summer, but especially during this extended period of remote learning, it's going to be, even worse. In fact, the NWEA recently predicted that in terms of formal testing, that we predict, excuse me, that we predict, I want to get the right number here, 30% decrease in literacy gains and a 50% decrease in math gains, just as a result. Those are significant numbers, and we know that they are going to impact our students differently as well. So, our lower income students, those that are least resources, most on the margins, are going to experience those losses most significantly. But that was a number across the board for all students, across student population and demographic characteristics. With that, so I say all that because in order to counter learning loss, what the research shows is that learning has to be regular. And so, like, logging into Khan Academy here and there is not going to help. I mean, it's not going to hurt, but it's not significant and regular enough to counter learning loss. So whatever supplemental resources you choose to bring into your home, they need to be with regularity and not an addition. So if you're going to use something like Khan Academy, it needs to be daily. There are other resources that I could point you to in terms of reading. So like thinking of little kids, a lot of libraries as well as PBS, I know like Michelle Obama was doing a weekly reading. So different organizations are sponsoring weekly reading times that you can log into and that your students can be a part of. Scholastic is having a big book club. So you can go to scholastic.com and join their kind of book club that they're doing for all ages. And the reason I'm pointing to the library resources and the weekly type readings is because there's regularity to them. So the students know every Tuesday at 10 a.m., I'm going to be reading this book, or it's reading time. And that's important academically, but also social emotionally, to bring in those routines and that regularity for students, because that's what they look forward to. My daughter always says, Friday is garden time at school. Well, she doesn't have those things anymore, but she can say that do you guys know Mo Willems? He's the famous author of the Pigeon books, but he does a regular doodle time every single week. And I found that the preschool kids as well as the high schoolers love to log in every week to his doodle time, and he teaches the students how to doodle. So regardless of the resource that you're choosing to bring in, it's the regularity with which you're accessing it that is actually more important. So if it's iReady, or if it's Khan Academy, if it's, the story times or the book clubs, it's that it needs to happen with regularity.
So that answer kind of answers another question that was brought up about summer break and academics. So knowing that this has been a very stressful time, that we don't want to just continue this pace that we're on until we start school back up in the fall in whatever way that may be. So how do we regulate our children, but also give them a time of summer break without adding to this, literary loss and math loss at these great percentages?
Yeah, this is also the world I live in. I mean, I don't know. What are my kids going to do this summer? How am I going to keep them going on math and reading and writing and keep their curiosity going if they're locked inside the house? These are real challenges that we all face. I think in terms of, and I know a lot of you have younger children as well, for math, the real focus and thing that you can do with your students is fluency. So practice those math facts, right? Make those note cards, the addition facts, the subtraction facts, multiplication. The fluency is going to help them when they have to relearn or accelerate their learning when they come back in the fall. So I really recommend fluency. And the same goes for reading and writing. Practice the ABCs, practice the sounds, make all your note cards. We call them, you can Google sight words for the little kids, of those high frequency words. Because what we need for our kids when they come back in the fall or the spring, whenever it's going to be, is for them to have prerequisite skills so that they can engage in an accelerated curriculum. So the things that they need to know with automaticity is the word that we use, with fluency, like that, are, I feel like, what we should really work on. So that when they need to face an accelerated math curriculum, they don't have to think what 2 + 2 is, right? Or what 8 × 8 is. They have that to automaticity so that they will be able to absorb and engage with new concepts quicker. And that's the same with the reading. Practice those sight words or Dolch words or high frequency words. Practice, the phonic sounds. All of those things for the younger kids are really going to be helpful so that they can jump right into new learning experiences.
Great, thank you. Well, I know we have 1 minute left, so I want to respect.
And I'll stay on longer if there's other questions.
So if you do have to pop off, please do so. We will not be offended. But in this final question of the formal session, can you address or just your response to the idea of redshirting, or the notion of holding your child back due to this at-home learning?
Yeah, that's a politically charged question too. I have a September baby myself, early September, who is supposed to be August. As we know, in California, our cutoff date is September 1st. So she's right on that brink and could have gone either way. And so I think the idea of redshirting is, I'm not going to take a stance on this one because it's so personal. I think you have to know your child. At the same time, I think redshirting just to redshirt out of a family's own insecurity or concern, I think is not an informed decision. So if you are considering it, you have to look at the child, and you should consider all the other children in the class as well. Because when we have a class of kindergartners and there is a huge 6-year-old, or a 7-year-old entering kindergarten who has all of these skills that their parents didn't predict they were going to have because they were worried and nervous, with a brand new, just turning 5-year-old, that has a lot of impact on the other students as well. And so I think, when we think from a community mindset, not just looking at your own child, but also how they're going to fit into the classroom. And not just now, but long term, what is that going to mean? They're going to hit puberty earlier. They're going to drive a year and a half earlier. There's going to be lots of things down the road that we may not want to think about or consider as we're looking at, oh no, my child lost some time in preschool. How far behind are they going to be? And also give credit to our kindergarten teachers. Generally, our kindergarten teachers are heroes. And all the students entering kindergarten or whatever grade are going to be in this same predicament. Are going to have experienced this lack of learning experience. So we're all I think we're all in this together, and our teachers are going to support all the kids where they're at. But if you're considering redshirting, I would say look short term as well as long term, and look at the impact it's going to have on the entire social environment of the classroom. Because now it may not stand out, but it's going to stand out later that your child is older. And so there'll be different situations and experience they'll be in than their classmates who are the same year. But each situation is unique, and we respect, every parent's decisions as they're able to make them within line of policies.
Great. Well said. I'm impressed by your answer. Thank you for navigating that. We are a community. We all learn and grow from one another, and we also grow in helping one another. Invite you all in joining me in thanking Dr. Miyake-Trapp for not only her expertise, but her time and her willingness to share with us today.